Be sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network?
Hello, my name is Evananda. I've been teaching yoga around the world for over 30 years, sharing my blessings by offering free yoga classes, currently on the most beautiful beach in America, here in Siesta Key, Florida. Furthering my collaboration to raise personal and planetary consciousness, I now present Beyond the Matrix, a program in which I have thought-provoking conversations with authors, scholars, teachers, and healers who are on the cutting edge of ideas which will inspire, educate, and open our hearts to the multiple ways we can transform our world.
My name is Evananda. Welcome to Beyond the Matrix, a show that explores the mysteries of life and empowers you with knowledge concerning your world and your being. Tonight, we are going to be discussing the therapeutic uses of sound. Now, scientists today recognize that the whole manifestation of life is vibrating. From molecular science to string theory, modern researchers are proving what ancient sages have taught for millennia, that everything is vibrating. If it's true that all matter is composed of vibrating strands of energy, then so are we. The body itself is literally a symphony of strings. Our cells, organs, and tissues vibrate. Billions upon billions of frequency interact with each other and resonate within us. Just as importantly, those vibrations constantly interact with what's happening in our environment. In short, in a world where vibration reigns supreme, the sounds and vibrations that fill the world outside of us can influence and change the vibrations inside of us, affecting our health and well-being for better or for worse. The converse would also be true. The vibrations emanating from inside of us affect and change what takes place in the environment outside of us. Here today to discuss this fascinating subject, we have Dorinne Davis, the president and founder of the Davis Center, which is the most comprehensive sound therapy center in the world and uses a unique diagnostic evaluation for therapy protocol to identify core issues in the areas of learning, development, and wellness for people of all ages. They offer remedial or enhancement therapies that address challenges related to autism, ADD, ADHD, APD, apraxia, dyslexia, hyperlexia, Down syndrome, just to name a few. Dorinne's 40 years experience as an educational and rehabilitative audiologist provides the foundation for the center's distinctive focus and evaluative capabilities. And Dorinne Davis is the only person certified in all the major sound therapies. Dorinne, welcome to the program. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All
Thank
right.
you, yes.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here. This is the most fascinating field, and I want to have you distinguish what you do from the more new age sound therapy phenomenon that's going on right now. So if you could explain to our audience, what is sound therapy?
Well, first, in my newest book, I define that for people, by the way, because what my specialty is the field of sound-based therapy. And before I define sound-based therapy, let me go back a couple steps and define first sound healing.
Yes.
The way I look at sound healing, which is what many people are doing today, it's using the vibrational patterns of some kind of a sounding source to change the overall energy of the person and or persons in the immediate environment. So things like drumming circles are a source of sound healing. And then if you want to get more detailed or more involved, we look at the word sound therapy. The way I define sound therapy is using the notes of the musical scale with, again, some form of a sounding source to get more specific foundational change within the person. So within that, you're talking about things like Tibetan bowls, crystal bowls, tuning forks, something that has a specific note of the musical scale attached to it, and any combinations of those patterns. Mine is a subset of sound therapy. Sound-based therapy is more defined because we're not just going to use the notes of the musical scale. We use the vibrational waveform energy of sound, so just picture sound waves moving out cyclically, and then we're going to use special equipment, specific programs, modified music, and or specific tones or beats. And very importantly, the need is identified through a specific battery of tests. So mine is more to the very individual person, making very core foundational changes.
And how do you determine which sound is appropriate for the person, the specific individual?
Well, my whole process, I'll give you the evolution of how I got involved in
Sure.
this. Yes, I'm an audiologist, and I specialized in education and rehabilitation for many years. And I'm an educator, so I've taught as young as kindergarten, I've taught college, and a variety of things. But in 1992, when I was consulting for a school for autistic children, they asked me to get trained in a therapy that was coming over from France. And I said, well, I don't know if I'd be interested, but let me do some research. I researched it and came back to them and said, no, I really don't think I want to get involved with it. It's not what I'm really interested in. But they asked me to please go, get trained, and come back and tell them if I thought it was something that could be valuable for their students. So I did. Very glad I did, because it's now changed me professionally. But I came away from that class not knowing what it was doing, how it was doing, why it was working. And so I began this quest to figure out what was happening. And along the way, I began to get trained in more and more of what I assumed were all similar types of therapies, because the word sound was in it.
Yeah.
I soon found out that that's not so. That just because sound is in there, that doesn't mean it's doing the same thing to the person. So what I did was put together a process to figure out how I can test. And the first thing I did was designed what's called the tree of sound enhancement therapy, because once I learned about these various types of therapies and found that they were not doing all the same thing, I had to find a way to figure out how they can be worked together and if they can be worked together. So the tree analogy evolved. And then once I had the tree analogy, I had a 4-part tree that I introduced in my third book called Sound Bodies Through Sound Therapy. And it was within that book with this 4-part tree, it was supposed to have been reported back to me to a publisher in the month of September 2001. And after 9/11 happened, the publisher came back and said, you know, we've got to change our focus. We're not going to be able to look at your book right now. So there was a mother in the office that day, and she said, you know, Doreen, I used to be a senior editor at Lippincott. Would you give me your book and let me take it? And I said, sure. I don't have enough hours left to do that. So she did, but I didn't realize it was going to take a while. And so it wasn't published till 2004. And so right before she said we send it out to get printed, is there anything you want to add to it? This is the time we can do it. So I said, well, I wrote it a couple of years ago. Let me sit down. And I read the book cover to cover. And I came away and I said, it's a really good book, but it leaves the people hanging. What do you do now that they have all this knowledge? So that's when I designed the test battery that I use all the time. It's called the Diagnostic Evaluation for Therapy Protocol. It doesn't give a diagnosis, but it gives a therapy protocol from the information that I glean from the testing, and then I can put the proper flow chart for the therapy based around that tree analogy. So everything kind of like just comes together full circle within sound-based therapy, knowing how to use it and what to use and with the order to use it.
But in my mind, I'm trying to imagine what kind of diagnostic methods you do use in order to establish what that person may need sound-wise. What is it about the person? What kind of diagnostic tools do you use in order to discern what their sound therapy needs are?
Well, again, going to my tree, the roots of the tree is related to your sense of hearing. Not so much hearing loss, but really over-responsiveness to sound. I've identified 4 different types of over-responsiveness to sound, and the root system of the tree addresses one of them. So because I'm an audiologist, I designed something called the Hearing Sensitivity Test. It's modeled after the work of Dr. Guy Berard from France. And so I used that. The trunk of my tree was sound processing, more not so much your hearing, but how you process sound, because to me sound is no longer an ear function. Sound is a brain function, because the ear is only hearing. Our body processes sound at a very minute level, at your atomic, cellular, and or quark quantum level. So the brain understands those pieces. So I had to put together a sound processing test, and it's at that level of the tree that the work of Dr. Alfred Tomatis is used, and I used some of the information I know as a Tomatis practitioner, and I designed this sound processing test. And then I actually have 2 versions of my test. I have a full and a partial, because I work with so many people who are nonverbal, autistic, and just really don't have a good way to communicate. I do a partial, but when I do a full, I use the leaves and branches on my tree, which is auditory processing, and I don't do diagnostic auditory processing, which I would do as an audiologist, but I do functional auditory processing, and I incorporate a standardized test that I can do that with. And my tree itself, my byline is learning, development, and wellness. So the tree is buried within the silhouette of a head because it is our voice that tells me about the cellular responses of the body, and to me, of course, that's going to be sound. So I capture a voice print.
I see.
Vocal analysis. And then also, I'm looking at otoacoustic emission. We haven't gotten into this yet, but part of my work is known as the Davis Addendum to the Tomatis Effect, where I measure the output of the ear. And so I use testing that an audiologist would use now to capture a specific type of response through otoacoustic emission testing. It's just not what I used for my research.
This would be a good time to really just hone in on that, because it is absolutely fascinating that our ear isn't simply designed to absorb sound, but actually emits sound. Is that not right?
Yes. In fact, everything in your body does the same thing. Every cell emits and receives the sound, resonates at its own frequency. But what's so unusual about the ear is people don't realize that we give this sound out. And the research that has been done prior to mine, other than maybe 1 or 2 other people, we don't really know what to do with spontaneous otoacoustic emissions. But they are finding out a lot of information when they do specific otoacoustic emission testing. So while I capture everybody's spontaneous, I use a diagnostic one, and I only capture it so that I can evaluate it someday in the future and get more information about it.
And so does everyone have a different frequency that they emit from their ear?
We give out many frequencies from our ear, but what my work has done, and I've actually put it in, I have a patent pending now on a device that will take that sound and give you your most important sound of the day that I call your keynote or your sound note, and then you would use your voice to reintroduce that sound to your body to help your body begin its own self-healing process for the day.
In other words, you try to replicate it through the voice, that frequency, that tonality?
Yeah, because we haven't gotten into the Davis model of sound intervention, but that's really the key and the premise to everything. So let me just share what that's about.
Please.
It'll give more information to some of this other stuff. Over these past 20 years, as I began to see the types of things that were happening with the therapies, got the flow chart, got the tree, got the testing, and designed and were actually introduced what's now known as the Davis Addendum to the Tomatis Effect, I began to see that there were certain patterns and flows of energy that became important. So the underlying philosophy of what the Davis model of sound intervention is threefold. One is that it has 5 laws to substantiate this first part, and the 5 laws simply tell you that your voice produces what your ear hears, and if you reintroduce the correcting sound to your ear, your voice regains stability or coherence. That work came from Dr. Alfred Tomatis, has been there for over 60 years. The other 2 laws are mine that I did introduce to the Acoustical Society of America in 2004. And what I did was I measured the output of the ear, and I correlated the frequencies coming out of your ear to the irregular patterns from your voice. And I always found at least one frequency out of a possibility of 10,000. So I think that's quite major, 1 out of 10,000, to be able to correlate that always in every subject I ever did. Some I found more than that. But there was always this one very noticeable one that stood out. And so I call that your keynote. And then because this Davis model has the 3 pieces, this first part connects the voice, the ear, and the brain. And when you reintroduce the correcting sound, in my case, coming from the ear, you've got to do it with your voice. And I introduce a special technique called ototoning to do that. So you've got your body in this cyclical resonance, so to speak, trying to keep and maintain its cellular sound energy. That's number 1 in the Davis model. Yeah. The second is every cell in your body emits and takes in its own sound, very specific frequency. Fortunately for us in the field of sound, that was identified, even though we knew it was there, by a researcher outside of the field of sound, a UCLA researcher. Mm-hmm. And so that was very key to us. And then the third piece is the way I look at the ear, because I no longer look at your ear as just a hearing mechanism. I look at it as your global sensory processor. Because with waveform energy, simply waves of energy moving across the board, so to speak, as it comes down the ear canal, it's going to stimulate at least 9 additional nerves to the one main nerve in the ear, which is the 8th nerve, but 9 additional nerves, and we have 12 cranial, so it's pretty major, that either flow through the ear directly or indirectly. Now, I'm not talking about neurological sensation so much as I'm talking about wave energy formation. So we know that we are going to vibrationally trigger all of our senses. And so with this sound wave energy coming down the ear, per se, that's one way to do it. But we don't only process sounds through our ear.
Through our
Perhaps
skin?
you put your hand on a piano and you feel that sound. Mm-hmm. You're picking it up through your bones, you're picking it up through your skin, and we process it through your circulatory system, your subtle system, your many ways that
like
we
the
process
deaf.
sound.
The deaf can hear that way through vibration through their bodies.
Yes, in fact, because I'm an audiologist, prior to getting into these things, I was into more rehabilitation of working with the deaf and hard of hearing to maximize their sound. I had a company that we sold assistive listening devices for the deaf and hard of hearing, and I would do oral rehabilitation and lip reading, and I worked in the school
That's your
system.
background.
Exactly. So this is really just a direct outflow of what I was doing earlier.
Yes, and so continue. It's so interesting. So that now, what I want to know is the sound that is emitted from the ear. Is it in any way also indicative of the missing sound component in the holistic sound energy system of your body?
Yes, it is.
Yes, that's
my because to do research in this field, there's not a lot of ways to measure this.
Yes.
But there are ways that you can look at what other people are doing. So, for example, within the field of hearing, maybe you've heard of tinnitus or tinnitus.
Yes, so many people suffer from that. So common.
Exactly. And one of the techniques that has been very helpful to them is to, it's called tinnitus retraining therapy, where they match the sound that the person hears, and over a period of time they reintroduce that sound. And so the sound will get masked out. You don't hear it anymore. And in effect, that's what I'm doing. I am entraining the brain to pick up on this new sound that it puts back into the body, and after a period of time, if there aren't other issues at stake, like, for example, if you're constantly injecting yourself, I don't mean physically with a needle, subjecting, let's put it that way, subjecting yourself to some form of an allergen, your body has a hard time trying to balance itself, and all you're doing is trying to countermand that every time you auto-tone your key note back, and if you're exposed to the allergen, it's going to pull you off again. So in those kinds of situations, you're not going to as easily balance those two sounds as needed.
So you have to be somewhat free of these other drugs? Is that
it doesn't have to be just drugs. It can be, well, for me, what I do in order to get a person to that point is I use the Davis model of sound intervention. I take my test battery, I use the flow chart for the correct administration, and I balance those 5 laws. And within that, I introduced this last year as a previously unidentified subtle energy system, and I call it the voice-ear-brain connection. So similarly to people who have worked on the chakra system or acupuncture meridian systems, these are subtle energy systems within the body. And I feel that this voice-ear-brain connection has also now been demonstrated as a subtle energy system. So if you balance this subtle energy system, then you can take it to the next step and by ototoning, find the sound that your body wants at that moment in time to self-heal.
And what are the major diseases or problems, physical problems, that it is most effective in healing?
Well, that's just it. I don't look at diagnoses. People come to me with their own specific challenges, and so from my testing, I can determine which of the therapies will make the change in those challenges. Whom have I helped? You name it, and I probably have. 60% of my population, of course, is autistic, because those are the parents who are also searching for the most change. But I've certainly, like the labels you were giving out at the beginning of the show, I've worked with attention deficit and learning challenges and many things related to oral motor, but I've also helped stroke survivors or emotional changes. I was talking to a mother today whose child has Williams syndrome, and I've been working with them, and Down syndrome. Really, I don't care what the diagnosis is. I care what their energy patterns are doing, and then work to balance those energy patterns so that they function better. And when I get into the concept of ototoning, finding that key note, picture, if you were anyone who knows yoga, one of the highest levels to attain in some forms of yoga is to hear the silent sound within your head. and then tune that back to your body. In effect, I'm telling you what that sound is, and one of the higher levels of attunement with ototoning is to be able to do it silently, and you can. So I think what I've done is...
So you teach that?
Yes, I'm beginning to. I'm still working on getting the financing for the patent device, and once I have that, that's great. But the newest book, which is called The Cycle of Sound, A Missing Energetic Link, introduces the process of ototoning without the device. So you do need silence to be able to hear it when you're first learning how to do it, and over time you can pick that up.
That's a process of meditation then, because it has the same, at least, qualities that you're describing as meditation does, because in meditation also you're very much trying to listen to the sound of the source, the divine source, and you do that through absolute silence.
Yes, and I also then, it's got a number of combinations. So even though I have this new book, I'm already writing my next book, and within that one, again, because part of the ototoning process is humming, and it's humming through bone conduction, and it's in a meditative state, and so there's many things that you find that a lot of pure research yet, because it's very difficult to do that, but there's so many components from other ways that have already been founded to work that it will catch on very quickly.
And so now, the Davis Center, is it a large center? How many people work at your center?
I used to be quite large until probably 7 years ago.
Oh.
When I decided that all I was doing was running a business, and I wasn't able to put this together as I'm aging, and I would like to leave something for others to be able to learn and to be able to do it. So about 7 years ago, I closed my giant facility, and there are just basically 3 people together, including myself, and 2 part-timers, who are helping clients now, but at the same time, what I spend most of my time on now is trying to put the processes together so that I can leave it and teach it eventually in a few years. So part of what I do now is just looking for people who want to collaborate on projects to help me bring that together. And eventually I would love to have a, it's called Sound Education Company, which I already have as a company. I just haven't had a chance to start teaching yet. Although for the very first time, I might add, I have been asked to be a part of what's called the Sound and Music Institute at the Open Center in Manhattan, and I am teaching for the first time a weekend course in some of what I do, so I'm very excited about
Oh, my goodness, well, it seems a very valuable medical tool because it's non-invasive, that it doesn't, there aren't any counterindications, are there, unlike medical therapies that have so many, they can actually be very harmful to a person. Whereas I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is very benign.
What happens along the way, as with any cycle? So again, picture the sound going upward on the upper part of the cycle, and when I do that, for some people with significant challenges, such as my population with autism, my process peels away layers of imbalance in the body. And as we peel away those layers of imbalance, I have to get to the core issue. And so sometimes after I've peeled away your defense mechanisms, which is really what it is, we get to the core, the person takes over from where the breakdown occurred to move forward. So it is possible to have what's called, to others, negative responses. For me, it's all positive because it shows me I'm moving them in the right direction. What's important is to not get stuck there and to continue my therapy protocol that I've put that together for them so that we're moving you beyond that so that your body can take over and self-heal. So, for example, I mean, somebody, let's say, I had a young man who was 16 years old who had been labeled dyslexic. And he had come to me, and he needed a root system and a trunk of the tree therapy with me. And one day when he was in the middle of doing the trunk of the tree therapy, he came to me and he said, "Dorinne, do you have a minute?" He says, "I've got to tell you some great news." Well, what is it? And he goes, "I went home last night, read a book cover to cover." I did not teach him reading. It was that his body had been repatterned enough that finally the pieces that he had in his brain already were stored there so he could utilize them. Or other children who have, let's say, sensory processing issues.
Yes.
They either get over-reactive or under-reactive. I have to sometimes peel away, again, what happens to them so that I can help them move forward.
It's very interesting. It's, to me, in my mind, reminiscent of light or color therapy. Because often the way that they do it in color therapy is that they choose the color that a person is most dislikes, that they have antipathy towards that color, and they use the color. They shine the color in the eye, and the whole room is filled with that color, and it often creates in that person a lot of negative emotions, and a negative memories, negative physical responses. But ultimately, when they come through it, then they have the cure, the cure of whatever it was that was ailing them, and that color becomes their favorite color.
And it's all about frequency, because every color is its own frequency.
That's right.
And vision is one, or light is one very long octave, whereas sound can be 10 to 11 octaves, depending on who you talk to. And within those, you have various components. And what I find happening is sound, when I begin the repatterning process, goes to your weakest area. It wants to help you self-heal.
Yes.
So it's going to go to your most challenging area, begin to stimulate that so you can begin this process of moving outward.
And what does that feel like? What is the report on what that feels like?
Everyone's different.
So,
yeah, that's what's so special about what I do. Everything is based on the individual, not generics. And so for some, I have people who get viciously nauseous, but I have others that are in this happy, wonderful mood. Others saying, oh, I have this tingling process all through my body, or why is my big toe, like, twitching? I don't know why. Everyone is different.
I see.
Because we are these vibrating entities, and if I'm vibrating, the person next to me is vibrating. Imagine when you go into the room of a group of people, sometimes you tend to gravitate to one or two of those people because your frequencies are resonating with theirs, and you either complement or are alternative to them.
Yeah, and you don't know why you're being attracted to the person.
Right. But it's your frequencies that are doing that. Mm-hmm. And then often once a person has become in tune with what I do, and their bodies are in tune, and then they sometimes don't want those same people. You mentioned something earlier on. I've described what our body is as your signature symphony of sound.
That's it.
Because if every cell resonates its own sound, picture, if you will, those cells as instruments. And so your body is playing a symphony. But sometimes those cells or instruments are not in tune. It's my job to tune you up.
It's very interesting. Now, in yoga, it is considered that everyone has a very specific tone that is only theirs and no one else's. And a gifted avatar or guru or teacher can hear an individual's tone or sound, and it is sort of your signature sound that more or less stays with you eternally, or is you. And it's very interesting that what you're asking people to do is to listen to their own inner sound tone. You're saying is that, and when they hear it, they can replicate it. Maybe we are diseased when we fall away from our own specific keynote sound. Does that sound at all plausible?
For some, yes, and for others, you're born with the irregular pattern because for whatever reason, some trauma or incident could have put a halt on your ability to resonate your own symphony in tune with everything else, because we start vibrating as soon as there's conception, really, with these cells vibrating. Your ear is forming at 4.5 months, and the neurological system for the ear is at 7 months. So there's a lot of happening in utero, and if your ear is your global sensory processor, for me, you have to start with your sound abilities. And so it's very important for me when I work with children in particular to get them as early as possible. I'm a grandma now, so you can bet your bottom dollar that my grandkids got their voice tested at birth, and they've already had some balancing frequencies, because I'm going to support them to be the best little person that they can be.
Now, I have a friend who has Aspergers syndrome, and he was just diagnosed with this, he told me, when he was 56. He didn't actually know he had it. He, of course, knew he was peculiar in many ways, and was socially not as adept as most people are, but he didn't really know what he had. Could he be helped by this kind of sound therapy, is my question.
Well, I feel anyone can be helped by just to keep yourself in balance, but I have helped so many people on the Asperger's spectrum as well. I actually love working with them, because while they're not really severely autistic, they very often have like a lot of social issues and or take things very literally. I have a case in point of one young man who came to me when he was 16, and his parents had him tested, and they said he doesn't have very many friends. He can do okay academically, he's very bright, but, you know, we're just concerned. We want to see what we can do for him. So he did the therapy on the protocol as I put it together, and when he was 21, he called and he said, Doreen, I'm going off to college, and I have to tell you a story. When I came to you at age 16, I was made to feel special my entire life. When I left your office, I felt normal for the first time in my life, and I'm going off to college, and I feel I need a tune-up, and I want to come and make sure I'm going to be in a good spot to start college. So he did, and he did just a quick tune-up. He went off to school, and he did very well. He had friends. He was actually able to stay in the dorm without having to commute back and forth from home. Yes, he still has a lot of the Asperger's type things, but he's able to make friends, and he's able to communicate and not take things as literally. So he just recently finished college, and he calls and he said, Doreen, I've just finished. I don't know where my next part of my life is going to be, but I know I need another tune-up. Can I come? So I just saw him the other day, and it's just so wonderful to see this progress of a young man that really was not able to connect socially begin to have a social life, you know, and take that. So, yes, your friend, I tell anyone who comes to see me, I can't tell you what are possibilities until I do that testing.
I see. And I have another friend who was interested in whether you could help them with ADD.
Oh, I've helped a lot of that.
Yes.
Well, there are a couple of reasons why. ADD comes from a number of different sources. It can be, I use either the head of the tree, which is vocal analysis. I can, through the work of Sherry Edwards in Human Bioacoustics, which determines that the body is a mathematical matrix, by the way, of frequency.
That's a nice concept.
Yeah, isn't it? We are a mathematical matrix of predictable frequency relationships, and you just have to be able to tell where the frequency or relationships are not in balance. So that's one way. And so sometimes within that we can see biochemical imbalances. We can see a lot of different other things that can be related to attention deficit issues. And then there's another one that you can look at over-responsiveness to sound. And so I mentioned earlier I have found 4 types. Sometimes they can have 1, 2, 3, or all 4 types of over-responsiveness to sound. And how can you stay focused and attentive if so much sound is distracting to you? Same way with sensory perception. Sometimes there's so many sensory distractions that you can't stay focused and attentive. And then there's other ones where if you process faster through bone conduction response than air conduction,
what does that mean?
Because we process sound in many different ways, and through the skeletal system.
I see.
we want you to process sound slightly delayed from sound through air conduction in the ear canal. Because if you process it faster through bone conduction, you're going to sometimes get like time delays, time lags, not sure where sound is coming from. And again, that all relates to your focus ability and be able to
You're
figure out what's
confused
going on.
by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's so many issues that can be present with attention deficit, either hyperactivity disorder or just attention deficit disorder. So again, that test battery helps me find those. It takes really the guesswork out of figuring what will work and if it's possible or should we try this. I don't use that term anymore, should we try it. I only go from the testing.
I see. And so, are there any cases that where you had really astounding results? Sort of I'd like just for the audience to hear maybe about some cases that were really profoundly affected by your therapy.
We should have them call the office once a day.
Yes.
My fourth book was called Every Day a Miracle, Success Stories with Sound Therapy, because every day somebody would come to my office and say, guess what? You know?
Oh, my God.
Some of them, some of the most spectacular ones.
Yes.
I once had, he was a 2-year-old little boy. His mother had heard me presenting at a parent support group. And before I started to talk, she said, I'm coaching soccer. I only came here to support the group. My kid doesn't need what you've got. I said, oh, well, thanks for coming out. And I knew she was going to leave early, but I was still talking, and she was still sitting there, and I no sooner got the last word out when she jumped up and says, oh, my gosh, you are exactly what I need. I'm calling you tomorrow. So she did, and we got to working together, and I needed a root system therapy to start with for this young man. So she was going to prove me wrong. I love people like this. She was going to prove me wrong. She kept copious notes of everything that was happening, that was going on. And her child, at 2 years old, had just been diagnosed on the autism spectrum. He was a head-banging child, and they had to wear a helmet to keep him safe.
Oh, yes, I've seen those.
Yes,
Terrible.
he was so much pain.
Yeah.
And he only could say 4 or 5 words. So the first therapy I did was 10 days. People listen for a half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the afternoon, to specially chosen music. And its main purpose, by my research, is showing that we're repatterning what's called the acoustic reflex muscle in the middle ear. And by the end of 5 days, midway, Mother said, well, I can't not say that this isn't working. My gosh, he's able to go back into the hotel room, and he's not bothered by the fluorescent lights. He's no longer banging his head. She said, well, let's just see what the next 5 days will do. So by the end of the 10 days, even the dad said, well, I got to say something working now, because he was not just saying 4 and 5 words totally. He was speaking in 3 and 4 word utterances. And he was looking at you in the eye, and he was just beginning to really want to communicate with you, and he was no longer fearful of everything around him. So ordinarily, I would encourage people to move quickly into the next therapy, which would be at the trunk for him. And they weren't able to come and see me immediately, so I had given them something to just kind of keep him balanced until they could see me. And when he came back, which was 3 months later, he had already gone beyond his 3 and 4 word sentences. He was now being able to say the alphabet with what words were in there. And it wasn't that he was just rotely saying it like a lot of little ones would do, because now he's only 2 years, 6 months. But he also knew what the words began with sound-wise. He could tell you if you tried to trick him or not. So that was interesting. And then he started this next therapy at the trunk of the tree, which I call listening training programs, modeled after Dr. Tomatis' work. And for him, what we do is 15 days of listening for 2 hours a day to specially chosen music that we're going to alter how he processes it through air conduction and bone conduction vibration. And then we introduce his ability to speak into a microphone for a feedback loop. Well, the basic program in my office is 2 sets of 15 days, separated by about 3 to 4 weeks. After the first set, he was now pretty much speaking in pretty good-sized sentences, 4 or 5.
Parents must have been just absolutely beside themselves with joy.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
They definitely were.
Yeah.
And when he came back for his second set of 15 days, he was now being able to do puzzles. And, like, for example, I still remember he did a United States of America puzzle, and not only could he tell you what the states were that should have been above it and below it, but the capital was, what the population was, what president was born in that state. He was just amazing. So when I get, my whole goal is to get the person to be able to exist on their own, but when you have autistic kids in particular, the process is going to be longer. So every so often I needed him to come back to do more jump starts to take him to new levels.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, as you said, the parents were ecstatic, and Mom wanted to go on a speaking circuit to tell others about this.
Yeah, I could imagine.
And she was excited that because she also did a lot heavily with nutrition. That was her field.
Oh.
So I remember when he was 4, and she had invited me to speak with her one day. The father came up to me very seriously and said, "Doreen, I don't want to do any Tomatis anymore." And my mouth hung open. I said, "What? We've come so far." He goes, I said, "Why?" He said, "Because he's losing his savantness." No longer was he standing up in front of people rotely saying the alphabet or tripping them up or the states or the bones of the body. He liked to do that one too, because now he could communicate. Now he was carrying on conversations and
he wasn't
doing all that.
Really serious. He was
he wasn't. He was teasing me.
He was teasing you, yeah.
So this little one went on so that by the time he was in kindergarten, he just needed an aid, and by first grade on, he's not needed support services after that. So that really is a push for early help as well.
Oh, that's an extraordinary story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got about 3 minutes or so left here, and in that time, I'd like you to tell the audience anything that you would like to. Maybe you'd like to talk about your book, The Cycle of Sound, or tell people how they can reach you, or about where the Davis Center is, and so on. Just take a few moments to do that, if you would.
Well, thank you. Yes, my website is thedaviscenter.com, and I do have my own personal website, but you spell my name Dorinne, Davis. And we my newest book, I have 5 various books and chapters and numerous other books, but my newest book, The Cycle of Sound, A Missing Energetic Link, really provides this new level of energy. It introduces the subtle energy system. And I really feel my work is really going to be the concept for the future. I do travel currently under the Davis Center to various locations in the United States to administer my test battery. All of the therapies I do now can be done in the comfort of their home. So there are 4 basic areas I travel to. One is Chicago, L.A., Dallas, Manhattan, but my center itself is in Succossuna, New Jersey. It's a big mouthful. It's up at the top part of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Yes, isn't it? We have the Lenni Lenape Indians to thank for that.
All right.
But people literally fly in from around the world for the test battery and know what is needed. They fly back, or when I travel to those other areas for follow-up testing. And I'm hoping over the next few years to get this into a format that I'll eventually be able to train and teach others. But right now, until I can get the test battery into that format, which, as I said, I'm working on trying to find some funding to do that. But it,
well, we can send the voice out right now and ask
for it. Send out that thought.
Yes, we need funding.
Yes.
This is a wonderful thing, and for anyone out there.
I feel sound is the medicine of the future.
I do too.
Had a number of people say that from time immemorial, going back to when Pythagoras used to teach his students to go hum and sing.
It's
people
been
have been doing
forever lauded as the source of healing. Thank you.
Can I just give my phone number?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay,
of course.
Good. Our office phone is 862-251-4637. That's 862-251-4637. And I never mind email. You can email me at info@thedaviscenter.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thank you for all the good that you do. Thank you for your pioneering work. We appreciate it, and I'm so glad that you came to the show. Thank you very much for being here. Yes. And for all of you out there, thank you for stepping outside of the box here on Beyond the Matrix. And until next week, may peace and love be your guide.
Be sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network?